officers that were selected were of European descent, what we call white people, right? And they were forced into servitude. They didn't have a choice whether or not they were going to catch slaves. If you lived as a free man in the country, it was your duty. If a slave ran away, it was damaging to the economy. You went out and caught him and returned him. Some of these people didn't want to do it. And that created a disgust for black people, because I got to stop what I'm doing for my family and go catch slaves and put myself through all this. And it created a contempt for black people. And sometimes, even in 2015, you can still feel that contempt. And I think that's what...
It's a shame, I'm sorry, it's a shame where I have to talk to my young son on how to conduct themselves when a police officer approaches them. I have to sit there, not talk to them about how to be a better person, go to school, get their education, but I also have to sit down and talk to my young men, my nephews, my little cousins, you know, how to conduct themselves around a police officer.
As well you should.
You know,
And
keep your hands on the wheel, on your steering wheel. Don't make any unnecessary movements. You know, even sometimes don't even look them in the eye.
Can I make a comment? The comment that you made is right on point. Police brutality is not something new. It's right now, it's in the media right now because of all the killings of all the unarmed black men and stuff like that that's going on, of course. But police brutality has been in existence for many years. I know many of you may have seen the movie Mississippi Burning, which is based on a true story. Those were policemen who were Klan members, who actually killed these guys for actually protesting and wanting to be able to have the same rights as white people. Okay, and then police brutality really hit the forefront when, of course, Rodney King came into play. It just so happened one individual had a camcorder because a phone did not record at that time, but he had a camcorder and he actually caught that on tape. Okay, and if you notice, after Rodney King incident, it kind of slacked down, kind of died down a little bit until the smartphone came about, and people were able to pull out their phone as it was happening and actually catch it on video. And basically, I mean, just like you said, you're nervous when a police officer stops you. I can remember one time, now I'm from Lafayette, I went to Northside High. I left my junior year, moved to Georgia. I came back, and I played football at Northside. I came back after my senior year, and I met a friend of mine by the name of Byron Allen. He played football at LSU. And you know, when we were young in high school, it was always, I run a 4.4, you run a 4.5, let's race. We'd always race at school to see who's the quickest. Well, on that particular day, we were on Malbreaux Street. And Malbreaux Street is in Wine Alley. I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with Wine Alley. It's a neighborhood here in Lafayette, in North Lafayette. And of course, we were talking trash with each other, and we said, you know, I bet I'm faster than you now. I bet you're not. So we said, okay, we're gonna race from here to the stop sign. And we took off running. We laughing, we running and laughing. And at the end of that run, as we're slowing down, guess who turned the corner? The people I worked for 21 years. And guess what they did? They put me on the hood of the car and put Byron Allen on the hood of the car, and they searched us in patterns, and we told them, look, the only thing we're doing is racing. I mean, at the end of the race, we laughing, we smiling. We didn't rob somebody and we're smiling, because especially once the police show up, we definitely won't be smiling, but you know, that was one of my first time really experiencing it for firsthand, me being basically profiled by the police, you know. And it wasn't just the fact of, I'm gonna pat you down, it was, we're gonna run your name, it was to the point where we stayed out there, K9 showed up, you know, and that was back in the day when they had square cars. The cars were box shaped, so it was in the 80s actually. I still get nervous. Well, I did get nervous until I became a police officer. when the police would get behind me. And the only reason I didn't get nervous anymore is because I knew the law. I had a rebuttal if they came with anything that I did or supposedly did or didn't do. My son, and I'm not going to take too much time, my son, but I think this is important. My son, who plays at Southeastern, he went to Turlings, played football at Turlings, was quarterback at Turlings. And of course, Turlings is predominantly white. And of course, they loved him at Turlings. And I've had many talks with my son and my daughter, and I've told both of them, you know, there's good and bad in everything. There's good in police, there's good and bad in priests, there's good and bad in politics, whatever the job is. There's teachers that sleep with students, there's teachers who go all out and try to get the best education they can for their students. But I told my son, I said, what you're experiencing at Turlings is not the real world. The only reason you're experiencing this is because you're scoring touchdowns, and you're throwing the ball, and you're winning games, and you're going to the playoffs, and you're going as far as Turlings has ever been. And one day we were going to Mississippi to visit Ole Miss because Ole Miss wanted to speak to him about going to Ole Miss, and we passed up a unit on the side of the highway in Mississippi, and I complimented the unit because that's what cops do. We see units and we be like, oh man, I like that unit, I like the paint job, you know. And as I complimented, I kept going, and about 10 seconds later, I looked in my rear view and the unit was coming up behind me. And I said, oh, he got somebody. And as the unit got closer, it started slowing down. Now I'm in the right lane. Been in the right lane since I got on that highway, on that particular highway. And when he got on the side of me, he slowed down and he actually rolled on the side of me. He drove his unit on the side of me and did this. And my son is looking at me and he's saying, what is he doing? And I looked at my son and I said, he's profiling. He's looking to see who and what is driving this avalanche. Now, I wasn't in a Porsche, I was in an avalanche, okay? After he saw who was in the avalanche, he hit his brakes and he got behind me and he pulled me over. I'm not nervous because I'm the police. You know what I'm saying? He walks up to my car, he asks for my driver's license. I immediately say, why did you stop me? And he said, you didn't signal when you switched lanes. And I said, I complimented the unit when I got off of Highway 30, and I've been in the right lane since I've been on Highway 30. And he said, well, you kind of swerved. And when he said that, I immediately said, you're a highway interdiction officer, aren't you? And a highway interdiction officer is an officer who looks for narcotics on the highway. And he said, yeah, how did you know? And I said, because I do what you do. For 15 years, I've been doing what you do. And he said, he looked at me with a confused look, and he said, you're an officer? I said, I'm not only an officer, I'm a narcotic officer in Louisiana. And he asked for my credentials. So I gave him my driver's license, my insurance, and I gave him my commission card. Shortly after, 4 more units pulled up behind us. He walked away, he went to his unit. I told him before the stop that we had to be at Ole Miss at a certain time because we had to register. We stayed on the side of the road at least 15 to 20 minutes. My phone rang, I answered the phone, it was my department, actually it was the sheriff's department here, saying, are you all right? And I'm wondering, how do you know I'm stopped on the side of the road in Mississippi? Because he called to verify that you really was a police officer, okay? So, finally he walks back up to my truck and he says, there you go, everything is good, you know, have a good trip. And I said, about 6 months ago, you took a class in Pearl, Mississippi. And I said, the first class was how not to profile stop. I said it was taught by a Hispanic guy from LAPD. And he looked at me and he said, well, how do you know that? And I said, because I was your classmate. You see, I took the same class with this particular officer. I was in his class. But at the time he was profiling me, he didn't see or recognize me as a fellow officer who took a class with him. He saw me as a black male wearing a New York Yankees baseball cap with tattoos on both hands. And that's why he stopped me. In fact, he didn't even stop me for a violation. He made up 2 violations because when I told him I didn't signal, I didn't have to signal because I'm still in the right lane and I complimented the unit further down. Then he said, you swerved. And I turned to my son after he walked away and I said, this is the real world when you're black. When you're a black male, this is the real world. Because if I wasn't in this truck with you, the next question would be, do you have any narcotics? Do you mind if I search it? And if I tell you no, then I'm going to call a K9. And it doesn't matter if you tell them I have to meet the president in 3 hours. Can you please write me a ticket and leave? You're going to stay parked on the side of that road until they pull everything out your truck and search your truck. And I told my son, this is the real world. You know, and I get tired, sick and tired of people saying, you're pulling the race card, stop pulling the race card. The whole deck. The whole deck. I've been dealt with that deck. And even me being a police officer, I'm not going to be biased and say, yeah, policemen are always right. No, there's good and bad in all of us. And that was one of those bad cops that pulled us over and was willing to lie about a violation in order to check me. If I would have been a white male with a cowboy hat on, listening to Hank Williams Jr., I promise you, he would have kept going. There's no reason to pull up on the side of me and look in my unit or look in my vehicle.
How was that officer disciplined?
I filed a complaint on him. I did call and I filed a complaint. The person I spoke to said, you mean he didn't stand down when you gave him your commission card? And stand down means, here's my card, okay, have a safe trip, man, take care. I said, no, he didn't stand down. I said, in fact, he kept me on the side of the road 20 to 30 minutes. And he said, okay, we're gonna address it. What do you want done? I said, well, I don't want you to fire the guy, but I do think something needs to be, some type of training or something needs to be done. I mean, he's fabricating a violation in order to get in my vehicle. His only concern is narcotics. When highway interdiction officers stop him, they don't give a damn about the violation. They only want to get in the car to search for drugs. That's the whole purpose of a highway interdiction officer. And of course he apologized and he called me back within a day or 2 and said, you know, they wrote the guy a consular statement and stuff like that, and that's it.
Real quick, we're on a pretty strict time restriction, so we're gonna go to the next question. Y'all two got the first dibs on the next question, if you don't mind.
Who do you think is most affected by police brutality?
Well, it fed right into my response, and Brother Landau covered some of the points that I made, and some of the things that I heard, I think is indicative to the response to this question. I think, who do you think is most affected by police brutality? Unquestionably, the black community. I'm, as a black man, find it disingenuous and sometimes appalling when we talk about the brutality in the black community by police officers, and the rhetorical argument is always there's some good police officers. Everybody's not bad. I think there is no unintelligent person in here. I think we all know that there are some good people in all professions, as we say. The problem I have is that usually serves as an escape for us dealing with the details of what we're talking about that takes place in our community. Now, there are some good officers in the police in the police force, and there are some bad officers. But there's only one system that is evil. And I suggest to you that from my experience as an adult and my experience working with young people, the reality of that demonstrating itself in those generations between me and younger people is the same. And why it's the same? It's because you have good people in a system that is evil. And the intentions of good people in an evil system is nullified.
That's right.
They're persecuted.
That's right.
They are economically pressured. So even if they want to do the right thing, they're not able to do the right thing. So that gives me no great comfort as a black man to talk about the good officers in an evil system that succumbs to that system. Those who are good and cannot project that good often leaves the system. And the system is left with those officers who perpetuate the evil that maintains the system. So it gives me no comfort to highlight as a defense when we begin to talk about the details of the brutality in our communities. I know some good officers who knew that crooked cops, under the disguise of, so say, eliminating the drug issues in our community, were picking up the drug dealers, riding them around the corner, stripping them of their monies, and then putting them right back on the street. Who is that drug dealer going to call? The good cop was there, but he said nothing. She said nothing. So the bottom line, on the end of the day, there is no comfort for any black person to make an argument that they are good cops if the good cop can't be a good cop and demonstrate the goodness of the so-called profession that he or she represents. So I take exception to that, and I think that we need to be cautious and not to make that such a big argument. We know good people want to do good things, but in an evil system, good people are nullified, neutralized, and their actions in the long run adversely affects us. They're either guilty by omission or commission. And either way, on the end of the day, the black community is still catching hell.
I'm gonna do is stand up for this. Right? We have a problem. Everybody would agree? Yes. We have a problem. How do you solve problems? You find solutions. Right? A pay raise does not, intangible will not correct the tangible. My solution that I'm going to strive for the rest of my life is accountability. Right? I learned it, right? First from my mother and then from the Army. Accountability. Being accountable for the actions that you perform. If we hold the system accountable, we will accomplish something, right? Now, for instance, if a police officer does something wrong and has to be reviewed or get remedial correction, right? That is determined most of the time by other police officers, right? Maybe friends, maybe they don't like them, but it is determined by other police officers. That's like saying a thief and a thief is the judge and the defendant. Who's going to win? The plaintiff. Well, the defendant is going to win, the plaintiff loses. Every single time. And that is the systemic problem. I'm going to push for the rest of my life to have police officers judged by the people that pay them. You. Why can't the police officers have a board of random civilians to judge right and wrong when they make a mistake? Why not? Why not? And we have to make and suggest and write laws that address that. We can't keep saying there's a problem, because that just rides my everlasting nerves. You understand? If there's a problem, you solve it, and Charlie might. So to solve this problem, we must address how they are held accountable. If a police officer can slap a young man in the face and another police officer sees it and it doesn't get reported, it doesn't matter. Or if somebody sees us and reported it, and then his friend says, hey man, don't worry about it, I got it, I'm gonna take care of the paperwork, I'm gonna say you took this class, go in about your business. I've seen it happen. Y'all seen it happen. These police officers probably seen it happen. It's a hard life. In the Army, it ain't no better. I've learned a lot. And if you don't hold people accountable for their actions, they will continue to perform them. We must hold them accountable.
The problem we have with that is when you're that good officer who's starting to speak out about negative stuff going on in the police department, you become disgruntled. You're labeled as the troublemaker at the police department. That's the problem. And the good old boy, see what Brother Takuna talking about, that system? It's called what we call down south the good old boy system.
Racism.
Okay? It's the good old boy system. And no matter how good you are in your soul, if you go against anyone that's part of the good old boy system, you a problem. We gotta deal with you. We gotta handle you. And next thing you know, you getting written up because your shoes untied. All right? You getting written up because your mustache too long. Okay? You getting paperwork stacked on top of you, and that's you want to end police brutality, then start protecting the good cop who's going ahead and saying this is wrong. What we did yesterday, what y'all did yesterday was wrong, and we need to address this. You have to start putting a system in place to protect that particular person, because that's what's happening. You have officers coming forward and they're speaking up. Look for them 3 years later. I bet you they're working for another department. Not because they wanted to, because they spoke up against the system. So it's bigger than just the particular officer that's doing some type of police brutality. It's the system, and the system stinks. And that's one of the reasons I got out of it. Is because I didn't want to contribute to a system that stinks. So that's why I'm no longer a police officer.
And now you're disgruntled, right?
Now I'm labeled as disgruntled. And if that's what you want to label me as, for saying, this is wrong, man. That's wrong. Chief, that's wrong. Chief, we did that in Youngsville, and we did it different than we did it in Truman yesterday. Okay? If that's what you want to label me, then tattoo it on my forehead.
Hey, name what you call it.
I got a question. When you came out about the police brutality, you read that statement about what they're taught. When you first came out, you read the statement about what y'all teach the police officers about police brutality. Now, let's say that, do y'all keep that training going about that, or y'all just read the statement about it? Because what we're seeing is, yeah, that goes by what they feel about if they can handle it or not. But I got pulled over recently, matter of fact, on my way here, and I drive an Infiniti, and I was there off College Saloon, and the cop jumped out his car, get out your car, your hands up. I didn't do nothing. And he had his gun pulled. My hands was up. But the first thing that happens is, because I'm a young black male in a white community.
If that happened, as you said, then you need to file a complaint.
I did call the complaint.
Then you can come with me after we leave this meeting.
We need to file that complaint.
We will file a complaint together.
Right.
That is inappropriate. If it happened, as you say, that you pulled up, you jumped out, and he's engaging your agenda, then I see that as a problem. That is me. And I'm telling you, it saddens me to hear these stories when I try to go out in the community and make a difference. It does. And it's very difficult. And I'll tell you right now, I was working on a department when Rodney King happened. And ain't nothing worse than being a white officer and having to work in a predominantly black area of town, trying to make a difference, and knowing the good people that I dealt with on a regular basis, and having to say, oh shit, what did these people do on the other side of town? I apologize for that. But really, so when you say brutality, does it affect? It affects y'all. It affects everybody. It affects the police. It ruins the community. And so that's why I commend Sydney and them when they called me. Yeah, I thought it was a great opportunity, because he's correct. You know, I spent 4.5 years in the service. I've been with the department almost 25 years. I understand. Everybody can complain, but it's when we provide solutions. And whether it's to change the system, as Andrea said, and to put things in place. you know, from a personal perspective, this isn't the Lafayette Police Department talking, this is Paul Bouton talking. I think it's going to take another generation of police officers. I think we have some good young police officers that are impressionable and doing some good things out there and are being taught correctly. But it's going to take that generation of those, you know, that are going on, that's the way it's always been done. Well, no, that's not the way the system should be, that it's always been done. It's got to be changed to the better. And it's through solutions and activists and people moving forward and those law changes as was brought up by the panel. That's what's going to make a difference in the community.
And good law-abiding citizens have to protect the good police officers. We pay them. Don't forget that.
And let me just make a statement about the pay issue, sir. I'll tell you right now, as a police officer in the city of Lafayette, the gentleman behind the police department in Lafayette, our police are paid a good wage. And I say that very confidently.
They pay more than soldiers.
Well, I say that confidently when our pay was adjusted. And you know, Andres may disagree with me, or other officers may disagree and say, "What are you talking about?" I feel I make a comfortable wage for being a police officer in this city, and I think citizens on a daily basis, when they say, "Well, they don't need to get paid more," I tell them I disagree. I think we have a system in place that pays our officers well. That's not the answer. It's getting to those younger officers, having programs within the community, as well as trying to change the system and make it more acceptable, but the perception change that if you do come file a complaint, that the right thing to do. Is a civilian review board the answer? I don't know. I don't know that I'm the guy that can provide that answer. But I think the community as a whole has to decide that answer. If that's the answer they want to try to address some of the issues within the department.
We have to execute the power, a citizen review board. Without any power, it's fruitless.
Yep. So I think that it's problematic there are a couple things that I think are problematic in really looking at the full issue. One, I agree. I want to get away from the good officer, bad officer talk. And also this idea that there's going to be a root cause, right? Because the issues that we see in that ultimately lead to police brutality are ultimately a system of that reinforces this idea that reinforces the dehumanization of people of color and of poor people. So I'm a professor. I have my degree in media studies, and today in my class we're talking about how people form perceptions, right? Because we have all of these things that we encounter. When I went to Penn State, I went to it's a very rural place, and I taught so many young people who had no interactions with people who were different than them. And so they learned about people of color, people who were different than them, from the television, from video games, right? When we know that more often than not, people of color are portrayed as villains, as criminals. Even in video games, a recent study came out that said, okay, yeah, we have more women and minorities in video games, but at the same time, women are still being objectified. Their roles aren't changing, right? They're still being portrayed in these stereotypical roles. And, the same thing with people of color. We can't, root causes, this idea is problematic because if we don't look at all of it, I think that media literacy is just as important as this thing that we're talking about. Because if you put people who are already socialized in a way to be afraid of black people, to be afraid of people of color, to be afraid of people who are different than them, and you give them weapons. And you send them out on the street, whether they're black or white, because I hear what you're saying. Somebody said, well, I don't want to make this a black and white issue, and in some ways it isn't, but in a lot of ways it's a race issue, it's a representation issue. The fact is that if you put people who have these beliefs, I'm sure a lot of people in this room on the streets, and you militarize them, and you say you are about to go out there defending your life every day. You go out there scared,
You wouldn't tell them that. You would tell them that they're supposed to defend everyone's life. But
however, I don't think that discourse is. I don't think that discourse is the predominant discourse that's happening within police departments. There are all of these discourses that are going on. You know, we can make these changes. We can make so many changes. We can have citizen groups that come together and watch over the police. We can do so many different things. However, we will still live in a system that is inherently racist, and people who refuse, who don't know, who don't receive the education in order to recognize it, who aren't literate enough to be able to see through it, and other people who refuse to see it. And other people who won't simply engage with someone who's different than them on a human level, just to humanize someone that they don't know. And this isn't, I mean, it's a big issue, and unless we confront it from a number of different angles, because we can only do what we can, right? You know, for example, like if I'm in communication, I'm not in criminal justice. I'm not going to say, okay, well, I know all about criminal justice, so I'm going to go through this route to affect this issue. I'm going to say, here are my skills. Here are my talents, and so I am going to approach this issue where I can best serve. Right? And so what I'm saying, so I want to complicate the issue, but I also want to say, everyone, figure out what your talents are and how you can serve. Have these conversations and educate yourselves, and I know it's trite, but you have to be the change that you see in the world. Because nobody, if you, then who?
And I want to address this real quick, and I want to talk about say that word for me again, Professor.
Dehumanizing.
Dehumanizing. The only person or thing that can dehumanize you is you.
Not true. Not
right?
true.
And listen, well, that's my opinion.
I hear you.
Right? That's my opinion.
I hear you, but I disagree.
Listen, let me continue. Let's have a little respect. Wait. Let me continue. Right? And the reason I say that is that the only difference between a slave and a captive is his mindset. Now, just let it sink in. And if his mindset is the only difference, we've all seen movies recently. Django. Django was never a slave after he got released by that guy with the tooth on top of the wagon. He wasn't a slave in his mind after that. He wasn't a slave. And that's where it matters. And each individual is responsible for their own mindset. And if you change your mindset, you change the world.
May I just say that we don't have this. You're asking people who are systematically oppressed and marginalized on every front to have this superhuman emotional and mental fortitude to, it's hard to wake up sometimes and see it. But I know it's hard. But what I'm saying also is that, like, for example, people looked at coverage of the New York Times around 9/11, and they said, okay, here are these discourses of dehumanization. When you constantly refer to people as animals, as bugs, as arachnids, as non-human. Oh, okay.
Let me just make one Django comment. I saw the movie Django, and in his mind, he wasn't a slave, but towards the end, they was about to cut his testicles off as he hung upside down. Am I right or wrong?
Yes.
Okay.
That doesn't change your mind.
A slave is made, not born. A slave is made, not born. A slave is not a natural human being. A slave is made.
Exactly.
It's an engineering process. It's a social engineering, cultural engineering process. It's the robbing of the knowledge of himself through fear and economic and cultural exploitation. It's not a mindset.
We have to get back to our knowledge. Black people started civilization. We don't have any more excuses. We have to stand up, stop being afraid, and move forward with our mission.
Okay.
All right, with that being said,
A handful of things to say real quick, as I'm taking notes. So to piggyback off your conversation about media literacy, I'd just like to say that you understand Django was made by Quentin Tarantino, a white man who thinks that it's okay for him to say the N-word because he has black friends. I'd like you to understand that is a fictional narrative, and that when you try and portray that as if it was historical truth, all you're doing is taking a narrative that has been fed to you from the Atlantic, to Louisiana, and you were just regurgitating it back into a room full of people who have also had to hear the same narrative.
Check your mindset.
Yeah, that you can't be a captive if everywhere is your prison. That it is impossible to call yourself a captive if there is literally no exit. You talk about how we need to get back to our knowledge, but our knowledge was murdered on the way here. Our knowledge was specifically sought out. They looked for people who knew the faith. They looked for people who knew the history. They killed them as violently as possible on the way here. There is nothing. Black people came to America as a blank slate. There is absolutely nothing that we came here with. So when you say get back to the root or get back to the origin, there is no origin.
My
Everyone
family
else
was
is
responsible for the uprising in Louisiana, so.
But we gotta stay to the question, basically. We straight away we gotta stay on topic, and we have to go to the next question because time constraint going on right here. So, next question. Do you think police brutality has an impact on how the public views law enforcement? Wave your hand, please.
Sorry, I'll try to take that. Wait, was that me or her?
She been at her hand.
Me?
Yeah, go ahead. You never spoke.
If you want to flip back to the next question, I'll tie it in with this one. Because when it said, who do you think police brutality affects? In my mind, I said not me. And you know what?